Jake Matthews kept his head down as he walked through the main corridor of Zenith Station Academy. His backpack felt heavier than usual, or maybe that was just him. 3 months at the most prestigious university in the galaxy, and he still felt like an outsider. Actually, he was an outsider. He was the only human in a school of over 5,000 students. Earth had only joined the Galactic Collective 2 years ago, and most species still saw humans as newcomers from a backwater planet. Primitive, they called it. Underdeveloped. A group of Velcrin students pushed past him, their thick armored hides knocking him into the wall. They didn't apologize. They never did. The Velcrin were warriors, built like walking tanks with natural armor plating that could stop a bullet. Next to them, Jake's soft human body might as well have been made of paper. "Watch it, soft skin," one of them grunted without looking back. Jake adjusted his bag and kept walking. No point in arguing. What was he going to do, fight them? He'd end up in the medical bay again, and he couldn't afford another hospital bill on his scholarship budget. In his advanced biology class, the Mindari students sat in the back row. They were telepathic, communicating in waves of thought that Jake couldn't hear. But he could feel them. Little whispers at the edge of his mind, like someone laughing at a joke he wasn't part of. When he'd asked his professor about it, she'd said it was residual psychic energy, and not to worry about it. But Jake knew they were talking about him. Mocking him, probably. The errands were worse in some ways. They floated through the halls on anti-gravity fields, their translucent bodies shimmering with light. They didn't bother hiding their opinions. Just yesterday, one had pointed at Jake during lunch and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Look, the humans eating solid food. How primitive. My species evolved past that 2,000 years ago." His roommate wasn't much better. Court was a Velcrin who'd made it clear from day one that he considered sharing a room with a human beneath him. The housing office had paired them up randomly, and Court complained about it constantly. He complained about Jake's smell, about his weird sleeping schedule, about the way he breathed too loud at night. Jake tried to stay out of the apartment as much as possible. That's how he ended up spending his lunch periods in the Biodome Gardens. It was quieter there, away from the crowds. The artificial forest was designed to simulate different planetary environments, with sections for different atmosphere types. Jake usually sat in the Earth normal zone, where the oxygen levels felt right and the temperature reminded him of home. Today he'd brought the cheapest meal from the cafeteria, a Nutri-Bar and some kind of synthetic protein that tasted like cardboard. His scholarship covered tuition and housing, but he had to stretch every credit for food. Real Earth food was expensive this far from home. He was halfway through his terrible lunch when he heard it. A small, pained sound coming from behind the atmospheric regulators, the big machines that kept the air breathable in each section. Jake stood up and walked over slowly. He'd heard stories about Drakis. Everyone had. They were the apex predators of the galaxy, massive dragon-like creatures that could tear through starship hulls. Even the Velcrin warriors avoided them. They were supposed to be mindless, violent, and extremely dangerous. So when Jake saw a small Drakis juvenile hiding in the shadows, his first instinct should have been to run. But that's not what he saw. He didn't see a monster or a predator. He saw a hurt animal. The creature was small, maybe the size of a large dog. Its scales were dull and flaking, not the shining armor of a healthy Drakis. One of its wings was torn, the membrane hanging at an odd angle. Its eyes were clouded with pain and hunger. Every species in the galaxy would have walked away. Their instincts would have screamed at them to flee, to report it to security, to stay far away from a Drakis, even a young one. But humans didn't have those instincts. They'd never encountered Drakis before joining the collective. To Jake, this was just a scared, starving creature that needed help. He knelt down slowly, keeping his movements calm. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly. "You look pretty rough." The Drakis hissed, pressing itself further into the shadows. Its small teeth were bared, but Jake could see it was shaking. He broke his Nutri-Bar in half and held it out. "You hungry?" "I know it doesn't taste great, but it's all I've got." For a long moment, nothing happened. The creature just stared at the food, then at Jake, then back at the food. Finally, hunger won. It crept forward and snatched the bar from his hand, retreating immediately to eat. Jake smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd had in weeks. "I'm going to call you Ash," he said. "You've got these little ash-colored patches on your scales. It fits." That's how it started. For the next 2 weeks, Jake spent every lunch period with Ash. He brought half his meals, even though it meant going hungry in the evenings. He found an old first aid kit and cleaned the wounds on Ash's wing as best he could. He talked to her, he was pretty sure Ash was female, about his classes, his problems, his loneliness. Ash didn't judge him. She didn't care that he was human or weak or primitive. She just cared that he showed up with food and kindness. But Jake's grades started slipping. He was spending so much time in the gardens and skipping meals that he couldn't focus in class. Court noticed him sneaking out every day and started asking questions. The mockery from other students got worse. Someone had started a rumor that Jake was failing out, that Earth's only representative at the academy was proving how stupid humans really were. Then came the day everything changed. Jake arrived at the gardens with a small pack of dried meat, real meat, which had cost him 2 weeks of his food budget. Ash loved meat and she'd been looking healthier lately. Her scales had started to shine, and her wing was healing. But when he rounded the corner to their usual spot, he froze. 3 Velcrin students had Ash cornered. They were older students, wearing the combat training uniforms. One of them had an energy blade activated, the blue light casting harsh shadows. "Killing a Drakis will make us legends," the leader laughed. "Even a baby one counts." Ash was backed against the wall, hissing and trying to spread her injured wing to look bigger. It wasn't working. She was terrified. Jake didn't think. He just moved. He threw himself between the Velcrin students and Ash, spreading his arms wide. "Stop. Leave her alone." The leader looked surprised, then angry. "Get out of the way, human. This doesn't concern you." "I'm not moving." "Then you're even dumber than we thought." The energy blade came down. Jake tried to dodge, but he wasn't fast enough. The blade caught him across the chest, cutting through his shirt and skin. Pain exploded through his body. He fell to his knees, blood, bright red human blood, pouring onto the ground. Behind him, Ash released a sound Jake had never heard before. It wasn't a hiss or a growl. It was a cry, high-pitched and powerful, a frequency that made his bones vibrate and his teeth ache. The sound echoed through the biodome, through the station itself. The Velcrin students backed away, suddenly looking uncertain. What was that? The alarm started as a low whine that quickly became a deafening shriek. Red emergency lights flooded Professor Taurik's classroom, turning everything into a nightmare of shadows and crimson. "Evacuation protocol initiated," a calm computer voice announced, which somehow made everything worse. "All students proceed to designated emergency shelters." This is not a drill. The classroom erupted into chaos. Students scrambled for the exits, pushing and shoving. Someone knocked over a desk. A Mindari student was telepathically screaming. Jake couldn't hear it, but he could feel the panic radiating outward like waves. Jake tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't work properly. His chest felt like it was on fire where the energy blade had cut him. His shirt was soaked with blood, sticking to his skin. The world tilted sideways and he grabbed onto a desk to keep from falling. "Move, human." An errand student shoved past him, nearly knocking him over. Strong hands grabbed Jake's arms. 2 security officers, both Velcrin, hauled him to his feet. They weren't gentle about it. Jake cried out in pain as they dragged him into the corridor. The hallways were packed with terrified students. Everyone was running, but nobody seemed to know where they were going. Through the transparent sections of the station's hull, Jake could see them. Dragons. Massive, ancient, terrifying. There were so many that they blocked out the stars. The security officers pulled Jake into an emergency shelter, a reinforced room designed to withstand attacks. About 30 students were already crammed inside. A medical drone buzzed over immediately, its scanners sweeping over Jake's wound. "Significant blood loss detected," the drone announced in its flat voice. "Administering emergency treatment." Jake felt a sharp sting as the drone injected something into his arm. Then it sprayed some kind of foam across his chest. The foam hardened instantly, sealing the wound. The pain dulled to a throbbing ache. The bandage wasn't pretty, but it would keep him alive. Jake slumped against the wall, trying to catch his breath. Around him, students whispered in a dozen different languages and communication methods. "This is it," a Mindari student said, her voice shaking. "The Drakis are finally attacking. We're all going to die. My grandmother always said they'd turn on us eventually." "They've never gathered like this before," someone else added. "There must be thousands of them." Jake looked up at the monitor mounted on the wall. It showed external camera feeds of the station. The dragons circled in perfect formation, almost like a dance. Ships of all sizes, but they moved as one. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. But something was odd. The dragons weren't attacking. They weren't ramming the station or breathing fire or whatever it was that Drakis did. They were just waiting. "Why aren't they doing anything?" Jake asked. A Velcrin student glared at him. "Be quiet, human. You don't know anything about Drakis." Meanwhile, in the station's command center, Commander Vex was barking orders at everyone in sight. He was a decorated general, covered in scars from a dozen wars. His armor was polished to a mirror shine, medals covering his chest. He'd faced down rebel fleets and pirate armadas without flinching. But he'd never seen anything like this. "Status report," he demanded. "Sir, we've counted over 800 Drakis and more are arriving every minute," a technician reported. "They're not attacking. They're just holding position." "That doesn't make sense. Drakis don't coordinate. They're animals. They don't form fleets." "Sir, they're definitely coordinating. Look at the formation pattern." Vex stared at the tactical display. The technician was right. The dragons were maintaining perfect spacing, rotating in synchronized patterns. This wasn't random. This was organized. "Find the source," Vex ordered. "Something triggered this. Drakis don't just show up for no reason. Where did they come from? What are they after?" The security team worked fast. They traced hyperspace signatures, checked sensor logs, reviewed every piece of data from the past hour. Finally they found it. "Sir, the first Draki's cry originated from Biodome Garden Section 7, a security officer reported. 47 minutes ago." "Show me." Surveillance footage appeared on the main screen. Vex watched as Jake knelt beside a small Draki's, offering it food. He watched 2 weeks of secret visits, compressed into a few minutes. Then he watched Jake throw himself between the juvenile Drakis and 3 Velcrin students. Watched the energy blade cut into human flesh. Watched the small dragon release that cry. The command center went silent. "Get me that human," Vex said quietly. "Right now." Jake was half asleep in the shelter when the door burst open. 2 guards grabbed him and hauled him to his feet. The other students backed away quickly. "Wait, what's happening?" Jake tried to pull free but the guards were too strong. They dragged him through corridors still flashing with emergency lights. Students pressed against the walls as they passed, staring, whispering. Some looked scared. Others looked angry. The command center doors opened and Jake was pushed inside. The room was huge, filled with monitors and control stations. Officers rushed around, coordinating evacuation procedures. Commander Vex stood in the center of it all, a mountain of armor and muscle. His eyes locked onto Jake with an intensity that made him want to disappear. "You," Vex said, his voice like grinding stone. "What have you done?" Jake's mouth went dry. I don't understand." "The Drakis. You did something to call them here." Vex gestured at the monitors showing the circling dragons. "You weaponized a juvenile Drakis. Do you have any idea what you've done? This is an act of war." "No. I didn't, I was just feeding her. She was hurt and starving and I—" "Silence." Vex's roar made everyone in the command center flinch. "You've endangered every life on this station. The penalty for this is death." Jake's blood went cold. "Death." He looked around wildly. His roommate Court was standing near the back, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. None of the officers were meeting his eyes. "I was just trying to help," Jake said quietly. His voice cracked. "She was hurt. I couldn't just leave her to die. It's a Drakis, a mindless predator. You don't help them, you stay away from them." Before Vex could continue, the entire station groaned. The metal itself seemed to scream. Every monitor in the command center went dark for a moment, then flickered back to life. Something enormous pressed against the docking bay shields. The largest Drakis Jake had ever seen, larger than any ship he'd been on, ancient and covered in battle scars. Its scales were the color of cooling lava, its eyes like molten gold. Then it spoke. The voice came through every speaker in the station at once. Ancient. Like the rumble of tectonic plates shifting deep underground. The universal translator struggled to process it, adding a strange echo to the words. "We seek the one who honored the pact." The walk to the docking bay felt like the longest journey of Jake's life. His legs trembled with each step. The medical foam on his chest pulled tight, reminding him of the wound underneath. Guards flanked him on both sides, their weapons drawn. The docking bay doors opened with a hiss of pressurized air. The space was massive, designed to accommodate cargo ships and transport vessels. Right now it felt too small. Through the reinforced windows, Jake could see her. The largest dragon he'd ever seen, so big she made the military cruisers parked outside look like toys. "Hands behind your back," one of the guards ordered. Jake complied. Cold metal restraints snapped around his wrists, magnetic cuffs that locked together with a solid click. They were the kind used for dangerous prisoners. His hands went numb almost immediately. Commander Vex entered behind him along with a dozen officers. Core was there too, standing near the back. His roommate wouldn't meet Jake's eyes. Through the speakers that voice came again. Closer now. So deep that Jake felt it in his chest, like standing too close to a subwoofer. Open the bay. Vex hesitated. Matriarch, we cannot risk. Open the bay. Vex made a sharp gesture. A technician's hands shook as he pressed the controls. The atmospheric shield shimmered, creating a barrier that would hold air in but allow passage. The outer doors began to open. The ancient dragons had entered the docking bay slowly. She was careful, deliberate, making sure she didn't damage anything. Her scales were the color of cooled lava, dark gray with cracks of orange-red light between them. Scars covered her face and neck, old wounds from battles Jake couldn't imagine. One of her horns was broken halfway, the jagged edge worn smooth with age. But her eyes were molten gold and completely aware. Intelligent. There was nothing mindless or animal about those eyes. She lowered her massive head until it was level with Jake. He could feel the heat radiating from her scales. Each breath she took stirred his hair. This close, he could see every detail, the ancient patterns etched into her scales, the way her pupils contracted as she focused on him. I am Scorchborn, she said, her voice filling the bay. Matriarch of the Ash clans, guardian of the third fire, last keeper of the ancient scrolls. Do you know what you have done, young human? Jake's voice came out as a whisper. I just fed a hurt dragon. I didn't mean to cause all this trouble. I'm sorry if I... Trouble? Scorchborn's laugh was like an avalanche starting, deep, rolling, dangerous. Child, you have done what no one has done in 300 years. You have shown kindness to a Drakis. Jake blinked. But, that's just, anyone would have. No. Scorchborn's eyes swept across the assembled officers and guards. No one would have. No one did. For 3 centuries we have been treated as beasts. As monsters. As things to be avoided or destroyed. Commander Vex stepped forward, his armor gleaming under the bay lights. Matriarch, I don't understand. Drakis are animals. They've always been non-sentient creatures. It's documented fact. Every species knows. Lies. Scorchborn's roar hit like a physical force. The shields cracked, actual fractures spreading across the energy barrier. Officers stumbled backward. Jake would have fallen if the guards hadn't grabbed his arms. When Scorchborn spoke again, her voice was quieter, but somehow more terrifying. We were sentient. We were spacefaring. We had cities that touched the clouds and ships that crossed galaxies. We wrote poetry. We created art. We built universities where young dragons learned mathematics and philosophy. We had families, culture, history. The bay was completely silent now. Even the hum of the station systems seemed muted. 317 years ago, Scorchborn continued, the Velcrin Empire decided we were too powerful, too dangerous. We controlled trade routes they wanted. We refused to submit to collective authority. Vex's face had gone pale behind his helmet. That's not the historical records. Your records are edited, sanitized. The truth was buried so deep that even most of you believe the lies. Scorchborn's golden eyes fixed on Vex. The Velcrin Empire created a bioweapon. A virus designed specifically for Drakis biology. It attacked our brains, destroyed our higher functions, reduced us to the mindless beasts you think we are. Jake felt sick. They destroyed your civilization? An entire species. They tried. Most of us fell. Billions of Drakis became feral within months. Our cities crumbled. Our ships crashed. Our culture burned. Only a few of us, the oldest, the strongest, retained fragments of what we were. Just enough awareness to remember what was stolen from us. An officer spoke up, his voice shaking. But the Galactic Collective would never approve. The Collective voted on it, Scorchborn said. 10,000 votes in favor. The Velcrin wanted it. The Mindari supported it. The Arans abstained. Every species either agreed or looked away. She turned her massive head back to Jake. Every species but one. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. Humanity? 40 human diplomats stood before the Collective Council 300 years ago. Your species had just been discovered. You had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. You had no power, no influence, no reason to care about creatures you'd never met. Scorchborn's voice softened. But you did care. Those 40 humans stood up and said, no. This is genocide. This is wrong. We vote against. 40 votes against 10,000. It changed nothing. But we remembered. Jake felt tears stinging his eyes. He never heard this story. Nobody on Earth knew about this. Why didn't they teach this in school? The collective erased it from the records, Scorchborn said as if reading his thoughts. Humanity was new. Weak. Easy to silence. Your diplomats were sent home and told never to speak of it. The official story became that Drakis had always been animals. That we'd never been anything else. Commander Vex looked like he'd been struck. I didn't know. I was taught that Drakis. You were taught lies. Everyone was. Scorchborn's eyes swept across the room. But Drakis remember. We have long memories. We pass our history from matriarch to matriarch, keeping the truth alive even as our numbers dwindled and our minds faded. She looked back at Jake and her expression softened into something almost gentle. We remembered the humans who stood up for us. And we remembered our oldest law from before the plague. One who shares food shares kinship. One who shares blood shares clan. Jake's breath caught. Ash. This human fed my grandchild. Protected her. Bled for her. Scorchborn's voice grew stronger. By the oldest laws of my people, the laws that existed when we still had voices to speak them, he is clan. He is family. Vex stepped back, his armored hand reaching for his weapon, then stopping. You're saying this human is part of a Drakis clan? He is under our protection, Scorchborn said simply. Touch him and you declare war on every Drakis in the galaxy. And there are far more of us than you think. Jake looked down at the magnetic restraints on his wrists. They suddenly felt a lot heavier. And a lot less important. The magnetic restraints came off Jake's wrists with a soft click. A guard mumbled something that might have been an apology and quickly left the docking bay. Jake rubbed his wrists where the metal had dug into his skin, watching red marks fade. Commander Vex stood 10 feet away, looking like someone had knocked the ground out from under him. His armor, usually so perfect and polished, seemed duller somehow. He opened his mouth twice before any words came out. I need to report this to the Galactic Collective Council, he finally said. Then quieter, I didn't know about any of it. Scorchborn's golden eyes followed him as he left. The massive dragon hadn't moved from the docking bay entrance. Behind her, through the opening, Jake could see the fleet of Drakis still circling. Waiting. What happens now? Jake asked. Now. Scorchborn's voice was tired. Now we wait and see if the galaxy has learned anything in 300 years. Or if we must teach them again. Within an hour, emergency messages were flying across the galaxy. Within 3 hours, the Galactic Collective Council was convening an emergency session, something that hadn't happened in over 50 years. The last time was during the Sector 7 rebellion. Scorchborn's message to them was simple. Humanity would receive a formal voice in the council, the voice they'd been denied for centuries, or the Drakis fleet would not leave. It wasn't quite a threat. But it wasn't not a threat either. Jake was escorted to the medical bay, a real one this time, not an emergency shelter. A proper doctor, a Mindari with 6 delicate arms, removed the hardened foam from his chest and clicked her tongue at what she found underneath. This should have been treated hours ago, she scolded, but her touch was gentle. You humans are so fragile. I don't understand how your species survived long enough to reach space. Jake winced as she cleaned the wound. We're stubborn? Apparently. She applied some kind of gel that made the pain vanish almost instantly. And foolish. Who throws themselves in front of an energy blade for a Drakis? Someone who saw a scared animal that needed help. The doctor paused, all 6 of her hands going still. She looked at him with her large, dark eyes. You really didn't know what you were doing, did you? You didn't know about the history. The bioweapon. The vote. No. I couldn't leave her to die. The doctor finished bandaging his chest in silence. As Jake was about to leave, she spoke again. My grandmother told me stories about the Draki civilization. Before the plague. She was very old and most people thought she was making things up. I'm ashamed to say I was one of them. Jake didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and left. The corridors felt different now. Students still stared at him, but the looks had changed. Some were curious. Some were afraid. Many looked ashamed. A group of errant students actually moved out of his way, which had never happened before. He was halfway back to his apartment when he heard footsteps behind him. Jake. Wait. It was Court. His roommate looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. For a Velcrin warrior, he seemed very small right now. I came to apologize, Court said stiffly. His translator was working, but Jake could hear the emotion in his actual voice underneath. We treated you terribly. I treated you terribly. We called your species weak. Primitive. I complained about sharing a room with you. Jake waited. His chest still hurt even with the medicine. "And now?" Jake asked. Court looked down at his armored hands. "Now I realize we didn't understand what strength means. You saved one small creature knowing it could cost you everything. Knowing those Velcrin students might kill you. That took more courage than anything I learned in combat training." Then Court did something Jake had never seen a Velcrin do. He performed a formal bow, going down on one knee and placing his fist over his heart. It was the highest form of apology in Velcrin culture, usually reserved for grave offenses. "You're braver than any warrior I know," Court said quietly. "And I'm honored to be your roommate. If you'll still have me." Jake felt his throat tighten. "Get up, Court. Of course you can still be my roommate." Over the next 3 days everything changed. Commander Vex was called before a military tribunal. The charge, attacking a Drakis clan member, which now carried the same weight as attacking a collective diplomat. He was stripped of his command and assigned to a border outpost in the Outer Rim. Before he left, he stopped by Jake's apartment. "I was wrong," Vex said simply. "About everything. I hope humanity does better than we did." Professor Tauric made a public announcement in the main hall, apologizing for not intervening when Jake was bullied. 2 other professors did the same. The 3 Velcrin students who'd attacked Ash were expelled. But the biggest change came on the 4th day. Earth's ambassador arrived at Zenith Station. Director Beverly Hunt was a short woman with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple gray suit, nothing fancy. But when she walked through the docking bay where Scorchborn still waited, she stood tall. Jake was called to meet with her in a private conference room. When he entered, she was looking at a data pad, reading something that made her eyes shimmer with unshed tears. "Jake Matthews," she said looking up. "Do you know what you've done?" "I fed a hurt dragon?" Jake said because he still wasn't sure he understood any of this. Beverly laughed, but it sounded sad. "You reminded the galaxy of something they'd buried. 40 diplomats. 40 humans who stood up 3 centuries ago and said no to genocide. I've been trying to find records of that vote for 10 years. The collective buried it so deep I was starting to think it was just a myth. Why would they hide it? Because it made them look bad. Because admitting what they did to the Drakis would mean admitting they committed genocide. Easier to pretend it never happened. That the Drakis were always animals." She walked over to the window. Outside, the Drakis fleet still circled. "Those 40 diplomats were brave," Jake said. Beverly turned back to him and she was smiling now. "They were human. They did what we do best, they gave a damn about someone other than themselves. Even when it cost them. Even when it was hopeless." Her data pad chimed. She glanced at it and her smile widened. The Collective Council just issued a formal declaration. Humanity gets full council representation. Drakis are recognized as sentient beings with full rights. The historical record will be corrected, all of it including what the Velcrin did. And Ash can stay at the academy. Jake felt like he couldn't breathe. Just like that. "Well, there are 800 dragons outside who made it very clear what happens if the council says no." Beverly's eyes twinkled. "Sometimes the galaxy needs a little motivation." She held out her hand. "Welcome to galactic politics, Jake Matthews. You just changed everything." 3 months passed like a dream Jake wasn't sure he'd ever wake up from. He walked through the same corridors of Zenith Station Academy on a Tuesday morning, backpack slung over his shoulder. The walls looked the same. The classrooms were in the same places. The biodome gardens still hummed with the sound of atmospheric regulators. But everything felt different. A shadow passed over him and Jake looked up with a smile. Ash glided through the corridor, her wings fully healed and strong. Her scales gleamed like polished copper in the station's artificial sunlight. She'd grown in 3 months, not to full size but enough that she could actually fly properly now instead of those awkward hops she used to do. She chirped and landed on his shoulder. Well, tried to. She was getting too big for that now. Jake laughed and scratched behind her ear ridges, that spot that made her eyes close in happiness. "You're getting heavy, girl." Ash made a sound that was probably dragon talk for, "You're getting weak, human." Other students passed them in the hall. A year ago they would have panicked at the sight of a Drakis. Now they just smiled and kept walking. One Aaron student even waved. "Morning, Jake." "Hey, Ash." "Morning, Trevor." Jake still had to pinch himself sometimes. This was real. This was actually happening. They passed classroom 7 where a young Drakis, a male named Ember with dark red scales, was attending advanced mathematics. Through the window, Jake could see him using his tail to write equations on a digital pad, his eyes focused in concentration. 2 Velcrin students sat beside him, helping him work through a problem. The Velcrin students. Helping. The Drakis. If someone had told Jake 3 months ago this would happen, he would have laughed. Jake. Wait up. He turned to see Tyler Brooks jogging toward him. Tyler was one of the new human students. Earth had sent 50 more once humanity gained full council representation. Tyler was from somewhere called Texas and had an accent that made everything sound friendlier. Hey, want to study together for the quantum mechanics exam? Tyler asked. I'm terrible at it and Court said you're pretty good. Sure. Library at 6. Perfect. Tyler grinned and headed off to his next class. Jake shook his head in amazement. The library. Where students actually wanted to study with him now. Where he wasn't sitting alone at a table in the corner, trying to be invisible. His communicator buzzed. A message from Court. Don't forget, training session at 1,400 hours. And bring Ash. She needs to work on her landing technique. Jake smiled. Court had become his best friend over the past 3 months. The big Velcrin warrior had taken it upon himself to teach Jake self-defense. In case any other idiots try to attack you, he'd said, and was also helping train the young Drakis in flight and combat techniques. The Drakis loved him. Court pretended to be annoyed by this, but Jake had caught him secretly teaching them Velcrin war songs. Jake's next class was interstellar biology. As he entered, Professor Tauric nodded to him respectfully. The old professor had changed a lot too. He'd started incorporating Drakis' history into his lectures, talking about their civilization before the plague. Last week, he'd brought in ancient Drakis texts that Scorchborn had provided, poetry and scientific journals that proved just how advanced they'd been. After class, Jake headed back to his apartment. His new apartment. After everything that happened, the academy had offered him private quarters. They'd called it a security measure, but Jake knew it was really an apology. The apartment was small but comfortable. One room with a bed, a desk, a tiny kitchen area, and best of all, a window with a real view of space. He'd hung up posters of Earth, pictures his mom had sent him, and some artwork that Tyler had given him. But the centerpiece hanging on the wall above his desk was a gift from Scorchborn. It was a Draki scale, ancient and beautiful. The size of Jake's hand, it shimmered with colors that seemed to shift depending on the light: copper, gold, deep red, orange. Carved into its surface were words in 2 languages. The original Draki script that looked like flowing fire, and below it, English. The smallest act of kindness can rewrite the stars. Jake read it every day. Sometimes twice a day when things felt overwhelming. Ash curled up on the specially reinforced bed. Regular beds couldn't handle a growing dragon's weight, and made comfortable settling noises. Jake sat at his desk and opened his communicator. 3 new messages. One from his mom back on Earth, wanting to know how he was doing and saying how proud she was. Jake made a note to call her later. The time difference was always tricky. One from Professor Tauric, sending him research materials for next week's project on cross-species medical treatments. And one from Ambassador Beverly Hunt. Tomorrow's the big day, Jake. First joint human Drakis delegation to the Galactic Council. The whole galaxy is watching. Show them what humanity stands for. You've already changed so much. Tomorrow we make it permanent. Beverly. Tomorrow. The council meeting that would formally establish the Human Drakis Alliance. Earth and the Drakis clans, working together officially for the first time. Jake looked at Ash, who was already half asleep, her breathing slow and steady. Big day tomorrow, girl, he said softly. Ash opened one golden eye and chirped. Then went back to sleep. Jake smiled and turned to his desk. He had studying to do. Exams next week. A presentation on cellular biology due on Friday. The normal, everyday stuff of being a student. He'd been terrified when he first came to Zenith Station. Alone. Scared. The only human among thousands of aliens who saw him as primitive and weak. He hadn't conquered anything. He hadn't built weapons or discovered ancient powers. He hadn't even been trying to be a hero. He'd just seen a hurt animal and decided to help. That was the most human thing possible, really. Seeing something suffering and thinking, I can't just walk away from this. And somehow, that simple act of kindness had changed everything. Changed the academy. Changed galactic politics. Changed history. Jake opened his textbook and started studying. Tomorrow he'd help make history again. But tonight he was just a college student with homework to do and a dragon sleeping on his bed. And honestly, that was pretty amazing all by itself. The galaxy had learned something it should have known all along. Strength isn't about armor or weapons or natural advantages. Real strength is choosing kindness when it costs you something. Choosing compassion when it would be easier to walk away. That's what humanity brought to the galaxy. And the stars would never be the same.